And I'm part of this panel because I've been working with a group of men who are living on death row in Nashville, Tennessee. I split my time between Manhattan and Nashville, and I've been doing that now for 10 years. We've been working with the men for the past 3 years, and the work that you see here exhibited at apexart are of some of those men. And we basically started an art class at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution 3 years ago, and the project is continuing even as we speak. So we're going to start out today, and I really hope that when we're finished that you all, I know there are some people here in the audience who also do some of this work in prisons, that I hope some of you will engage in conversation and share your experiences too. We're going to start out with Baz, so if you want to go ahead and get started.
Sure. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this fall. Well, I'm calling it a winter day. This is not fall in my book, but
day.
Yeah, it feels like it. So I wanted to just paint a little picture of what the prison to college pipeline is, give you a sense of what we do. And so I thought I would start with, we've been lucky enough to have gotten some really great press for the program. We were in the New York Times, we were on PBS, and on Al Jazeera. So I thought I would show you the clip from Al Jazeera so you can get a sense of the program, and then I can run through some of the most sort of significant pieces of it.
At first glance, it looks like any college English class.
You ready? We're going to read just that quote. What is the quote again?
But the man standing guard and the barbed wire outside the windows are a constant reminder. This lesson on Shakespeare's Macbeth is taking place inside the Otisville Correctional Facility, and most of the students are inmates. 34-year-old Matthew Wilson is near the end of a 13-year sentence for armed robbery. He joined the class for one reason.
Change. I knew I had to change, and education is a part of that. Education opens up doors.
Students from the outside also participate in the class. They say they're learning from the inmates as well as their instructor.
Understanding how much they really care about their education, how much time they put into it, puts all the college kids who put everything off after parties to shame.
The Prison to College Pipeline is sponsored by John Jay College of Criminal Justice here in New York. And what makes it unique is that it guarantees inmates a spot here or at any city university after their release. The idea is to provide an education that continues not only beyond prison, but also beyond the classroom.
Robert Tate is now pursuing a major in English after serving 10 years for robbery. He says the program is a lifeline.
My thing was, when I came home, find a job, find steady housing, find steady income, and get back to family and start to build my life over again. So I was starting at 30 years old as a 17-year-old.
The program provides assistance with all of those things and more.
Specifically for a population that's coming back to the community after having served time, it's vital to reestablish community, and a new community maybe from the one that you left behind. And so the campus becomes that place to find a new self, find a new community, and build a new life after prison.
The new program is yet to see its first graduate, but participants say they appreciate the second chance to expand their minds and opportunities. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, New York.
Okay, so that's us. That's the program. But I'll say a couple words about how I started it and some of the crucial components of it, and then update some of that information, even though that's quite a recent clip. So basically, I was approached when I was doing educational volunteer work in prisons about 12 years ago, and I was just doing it informally, and I was approached by a superintendent at Otisville Correctional Facility, which is about an hour and 45 minutes upstate, and he said, why doesn't John Jay have any program in the prisons? And I really had no answer to that question because it seemed ridiculous. How can we be both Cuny, which this is our population, how can we be John Jay College of Criminal Justice and not be engaging in this kind of work? So that was really the impetus for starting it. But ultimately, the thinking process was, how can we do something at John Jay that's different from what already exists? And I'm sure some of you are familiar with the fact that not enough exists as a result of legislature that happened in 1994, where most of the funding where essentially incarcerated students became ineligible for financial aid. for federal and state financial aid, and that decimated college programs in prisons throughout the country. They dropped from about 360 to 8 in the span of a year. And then they were slowly rebuilding after that, but there aren't enough in general. So it tends to be a very state-to-state thing. New York, relatively speaking, does okay in that college department with the BARD program, with the Hudson Link program, very strong programs. So although still, again, even now, not nearly serving enough people and filling enough of the hole. But so the thinking was, what could we do at John Jay that was innovative, that was different from what already existed? And so the thing that really I seized upon was two things. One was this idea about educational timing, and the thought that maybe there are certain times in an incarcerated person's experience behind bars that are particularly ripe for seizing and for presenting opportunities for education. And I didn't come up with this notion myself. I read various studies on the demands of those people within 5 years of release and the things that they were most looking for, and the number one thing that they asked for was education. So it seemed, okay, let's maybe think about this focus on those individuals who are coming home. John Jay already had a prisoner reentry institute, which was quite new at the time. This was about 7 years ago when I first started thinking about the project. So I approached them and I said, this makes sense to house the program here in a reentry context. And the other thing is the word that I used up in the Al Jazeera clip, which is this idea of the matrix of services. I always found myself yelling at students on the outside to take advantage of college and take advantage of Cuny. I went to Cuny for undergrad myself, and I definitely milked it for all it was worth in all kinds of good ways. But I was always saying to my students that this is sort of the one time in your life where you're given a lot of free things for nothing, and free counseling, free tutoring, free academic services, free food, free intellectual engagement, free community, really. It is that experience. And so I thought to myself, well, who could sort of be poised to benefit from this in the best way possible, but this population? So it sort of made sense to orient this program as a reentry focused program. And so that's how the concept of the prison to college pipeline was born. And of course, the name is a reversal on the school to prison pipeline, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. And essentially, the concept is simple. How can we reverse the flow? How can we create a kind of seamless transition from prison into a university setting? So what the program looks like is we've got, on the one hand, there's traditional college classes inside a prison. We're at Otisville, as I said, but we recruit from 4 different prisons around New York State, and that's growing, and we're moving sort of out of the hub and further upstate every year. So we actually recruit students. We do a massive recruitment effort and collect students, have them transferred to Otisville, which is where the program is based. And these students take classes on the inside, they start accruing credits, and then they are guaranteed a slot in Cuny upon release, assuming they maintain a C average in the program. So, and then once they come home, we transition them into the Cuny system. We are partnered with Hostos Community College, but really we're partnered with all of Cuny. It's a John Jay program, but if a student wants to come home and go wherever, that's fine with us. We don't have stake in having the student be at John Jay per se. So generally, we have students come home and go to John Jay, go to Hostos, sometimes Bronx Community College. We had a student about to be enrolled at SUNY Empire, which is in Long Island. So it depends on a whole host of factors. The other thing, and you saw that in the clip too, is we bring students from John Jay up to the prison once a month to take class alongside the incarcerated students. We call these learning exchanges. And so I also recruit for that and collect about 10 students that come up once a month. Yesterday actually was our first learning exchange. It was pretty phenomenal. The impact of that, I mean, I kind of think of it as bringing college to prison, but also bringing prison to college. In other words, the students become these ambassadors of radical transformation on campus, because their minds are basically blown from the first 20 minutes inside that classroom, where every stereotype they have get shattered in a matter of 10 minutes. And again, I mean, the interesting thing, some of you might know about the Inside Out program, which happens at Temple, which has a similar model around students coming in. I mean, our Cuny students are not radically different. They come from the same communities as the individuals they're sitting in a prison classroom with. They're not coming from very different worlds. Many of them have incarcerated family members, but even they have been sort of sold that myth about what criminality looks like and what prisons look like. So it is actually always amazing to me to see that even among our student population who would be as sensitized to this and as sort of aware of what's kind of really going on as possible, even for them, it's an earth-shattering experience to sit in a classroom all year and come to know these individuals in a very different kind of way. The other thing that does is it obviously creates a network for the students coming home. They have an opportunity to get to know faculty members, to get to know students, so they come home to a community. Whenever we have a student come home, we take them on a tour. They come to campus within the first week of coming home from prison, whether they've been inside for 2 years or 22 years. They always come see us. We give them a tour. They see students, they see faculty members. So it's really an amazing thing because they suddenly realize I have been part of this community all along, and it's always a really beautiful moment. So we work with them on all aspects of coming home. I hate the word reentry because it sounds so like enormously simple. Oh yeah, just re-enter. But it's, as we know, it's anything but that. It's an inordinate challenge, a hellish experience, a total resurrection. And so the challenges of that are immense. They're in many ways way more challenging. I always say that the college on the inside piece is in many respects the easy part and the pleasurable part. Minus the bureaucracies. I also joke that I work with the two biggest bureaucracies in New York, which is the Department of Corrections and Cuny. Not always so much fun. So there are certainly those challenges, but the college on the inside is an absolutely magnificent experience pedagogically for everyone who's ever taught in the program, myself included. I teach English 101 in the program every fall, and it's a gift to you as an educator. It's a gift to the students. Just yesterday, the students, all they said to me was, we can't believe what it's like to be in a classroom where every single person is engaged. No one is on their cell phone. No one is sending text messages, that it was, to them, it felt like a life-changing experience, so let alone to other faculty members. But the challenges of coming home are where the real, the real sort of Sisyphean tasks come into play, which is getting housing, getting jobs for our students. We work with them when we're partnered with two organizations that help us out in this regard. One is the Osborne Association, which is a general reentry organization, and the other is College Initiative, which is actually now part of our umbrella. And they assist individuals with criminal backgrounds to get involved in higher education in various capacities. They provide mentorship and financial aid assistance. So we work with our students on all of those things, but how likely they are to start school and how long it takes them to go to school can vary quite a bit, depending on whether you're coming home to a shelter, whether you're coming home to some level of family support, whether you have 3 children that you need to support, and so on. But we have had, we're still quite a small program. We envisioned a 5-year pilot phase, and this year is the start of our 5th year. So we're still technically in our pilot phase. We have about 20 students on the inside and about 20 who've come home. And about a little more than 1/3 of the ones who've come home are enrolled full-time in Cuny, and all of them working full-time as well. And I'll tell you a little bit more about a couple of our students in a second. So the other thing that we do, too, that's part of this, the Prison to College Pipeline started as this very specific pipeline effort, and now it's become broader to sort of focus on increasing, number one, increasing the intellectual life of prisons more generally, and as many as we sort of possibly can. Actually, I should say intellectual and cultural life. So we, in that regard, and also planting the seed of higher education in as many incarcerated minds as possible. So to that end, we do a couple of things. we've started a what's now becoming a growing developmental education program. So we use the Cuny assessment test, which is pretty much the admissions test for Cuny. We now administer that in prisons all over New York State. It's the reading and writing exam. We got permission to do it by pen and paper because there's no, internet capacity in a prison. So we administer that, and then in certain prisons where we're able, for the individuals who don't pass, we're able to give them prep classes in order to retake the exam and pass. And we do information sessions about Cuny, about higher education, dispelling a lot of the myths. There are an enormous number of myths about higher education within the prison context. It's actually unbelievable how much misinformation is out there along the lines of, I can never get financial aid, I'm not eligible for college for all kinds of reasons. So we do a lot of myth busting, and we do a lot of testing, which is kind of, and we tell our, the potential students, once you've taken that step, you've taken that step, and you can then have those scores. They're on record for 10 years. They're useful to you when you come home. So we get a lot of just people contacting us, hey, I saw you speak at Green, or I saw you speak at Queensboro Correctional Facility here in the city. Can you help me out? I just came home, I want to go to school, which is wonderful, because we're always thrilled to get those kinds of emails, calls. We have people drop into John Jay and just come look for me and say, hi, I came home a week ago. How do I go to John Jay? So that's also a part of what we do. And then the other thing we try to bring, we partnered with the Tribeca Film Institute about 1.5 years ago to bring film screenings to different prisons. We started at Otisville, and now, as of this week, we're expanding to a maximum upstate as well. And so we do film screenings, and we also train incarcerated men who already have degrees and thus are ineligible for our program to be facilitators. The Tribeca staff works with them to be film discussion facilitators, and also engage the rest of the population in kind of workshops and activities after the film. We also bring up directors, we bring up producers, actors. It's kind of an opportunity to, again, plant that seed of education, because the screenings are not, we're not showing Rocky. We're showing, some substantial stuff, and the conversation is quite intense after the screening. So people get excited about, hey, maybe I should think about college. I like talking about that film. And also, it's a great way of, we're always trying to break down that barrier between the general public and the prison, and to get people inside and to get people to see this firsthand, because when you see it firsthand, it inevitably changes you in powerful ways. So the last thing I'll say is that, so we've had so many incredible students pass through the program, and we'll actually be having our first graduates in May. We have a student graduating from John Jay with a bachelor's in philosophy who's pre-law. He's taking the LSAT pretty soon. And that was also a massive hurdle, it still is, and because potentially he could be denied admission to the bar as a result of his criminal background, as a result of things that happened when he was 20. So, but he's done enormously well, and he's graduating. Then we have another student graduating from Hostos Community College with a bachelor's in criminal justice in May. So those will be our first 2 graduates, which is really exciting. And the thing I'll say, I've seen so many miraculous stories from our guys, but the one who's graduating from Hostos is particularly miraculous, and I'll just end, I'll take that as a here. I'll just end by telling you his story, because it's so mind-blowing and it's so indicative of the kinds of resilience and brilliance that lies in among our students. So he came out of prison, and the day he came out of prison, he was literally kidnapped from the prison gates he had been to prison, he was locked up when he was 18, and he served 15 years for a crime that he committed at the age of 17. And he came home, his old enemies from all those years ago counted down the days of his release, showed up, kidnapped him, and someone popped out of the trunk. It was all over the news. It was an enormously horrific incident. They started shooting. He was shot 3 times. He managed to be airlifted out, and they saved his life at Westchester Medical Center. This all happened basically 1 year ago to this day, actually. They caught the folks who did this to him, and I'd like to say justice happened, but I don't know if shipping them off to prison to be further damaged and further inflict violence is my vision of justice, and it definitely wasn't his, and we talked a lot about this. But the most incredible thing is that this all happened in mid-October of last year. By January, he was a full-time college student, and he's graduating in May. He was in school with his arm in a sling, in doing physical therapy, and running to the computer lab at all hours, in various states of what was potentially danger, because we didn't even really know, what the repercussions of all this would be. But and now he's not only graduating, he's a student success mentor on campus. He's an honors student. He's probably going to win half of Hostess's awards at graduation. So yeah, that's one of the really, really happy and beautiful and inspirational stories that we're privy to. So I'll stop there, and we'll talk some more during the discussion.
Great. I'm sure there'll be lots to ask, lots to talk about. All right, Craig?
Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Craig Cullinane. I'm the Director of Programming at Rehabilitation Through the Arts, which is RTA, which is a not-for-profit organization based in Westchester that brings arts programming to 5 New York State correctional facilities. I'm going to go to the next slide. It takes a second, I hear. Yes, and here are pictures of the 5 correctional facilities we're in. Top left is Sing Sing, famous, iconic prison in Ossining. Down here on the bottom right is Greenhaven. Those are the 2 maximum security men's prisons that we're in. Upper right and bottom left are Fishkill and Woodburn. Those are medium security men's prisons. And the center prison is Bedford Hills, which is the only maximum security women's prison, state prison in New York. So I'm the Director of Programming, so that basically means that I manage about 15 programs in 5 prisons. We have a whole array of different artists, teaching artists, who come into these 5 facilities. We have programming every day of the year. The programs range from full-length theater productions to, like Barbara said before, creative writing. We have the only modern dance program in the United States for men at Woodburn. We have painting and drawing, all kinds of different things. And a lot of it has to do with the teachers and artists who come in and want to share their gifts with the men and women who are inside. I want to speak a little bit about the history of RTA, how this whole thing got started. It got started with an extraordinary woman named Catherine Vokins, who's the founder and executive director of RTA. About 20, maybe a little over 20 years ago, her husband was having what she likes to call a midlife correction, and they had this international consulting business. She's a businesswoman, and he was kind of looking for this new life, so he went to a program of ministry, and he went into Sing Sing, and so he started doing ministry services in Sing Sing. And at one of the graduations for that, she was there, and she was just talking to this inmate, this prisoner next to her, and said, she just got the idea of asking him this question, is there theater here? And he said no, and she said, do you think people would like it if there was? And he said yes, and so she was kind of a can-do person, not an artist herself, but a person who's very competent, and she just started negotiating with the Sing Sing administration, and thus was launched what was called at that time the Prison Theater Workshop at Sing Sing. That was 20 years ago. And what happened over time, they started writing their own pieces, devised pieces. They started doing, works by other people, other playwrights. And after about 2.5 years, the men inside themselves started kind of reflecting on what this experience was. And they said, this is more than we're just putting on a play. We're learning about ourselves. We're growing as people through the artistic process. We're building what we now call critical life skills that are useful in terms of reentry, that word, into the world. And so they actually named RTA Rehabilitation Through the Arts. And so from there, it grew at Sing Sing, and some of the men in the program would get sent to other prisons, like their status would drop from maximum to medium, so they got sent to Fishkill and Woodburn, or they would get sent to Greenhaven, and kind of like seeds that get sent out, they wanted to have RTA be in their facilities as well. And then somehow we connected with Bedford Hills, the women's prison, about 9 years ago. So in this way, we're in these 5 prisons. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the programming we do, and I have a couple little slides that I want to show you. I do want to say RTA has 2 research studies that we've done that I think are really important. One of the research studies done at Purchase, SUNY Purchase, RTA members compared to a control group have far fewer disciplinary issues inside than people who are a part of this control group. And they get fewer tickets, they spend more time in the box, they spend less time in lockdown, and generally become, I guess what the prison would consider better citizens inside, whatever that means, and that's complicated, but their experience of living inside becomes different. And I think more importantly for today and this experience about education and about transformative programming inside, we have another research study through John Jay College actually that shows that men and women who participate in RTA are much more often to avail themselves of the educational programming that happens inside. And it's interesting because some people come into our program and they were in the school to prison pipeline, and maybe they didn't do school or they didn't feel comfortable in school, and so they weren't successful in school growing up, but they loved to sing, or they were an actor, or they were a painter, and they felt more comfortable entering into some kind of programming that was artistic. So they would step into our programs, and then all of a sudden they'd be in a community of artists where the people they were hanging out with every day inside prison were people who were wanting to grow as people, who were wanting to avail themselves of educational programming. And their friends and mentors became people who were availing themselves of programming, like from John Jay or Bard or Rising Hope. And all of a sudden, they could see themselves, and they were encouraged by other people to take advantage of the educational programming inside. So this research study shows that RTA is a conduit for those people, and we really like to think of ourselves as supporting the educational programming, because people come into our programs, but then they want to go into BARD or they want to go into college, and we're like, great, go. And we lose them for a little bit, and that's okay, because we know and we understand that the farther you go in your education, the better prepared you're going to be for reentry into the world. That's the #1 indicator. So we really want to support them in that journey. The farther you go in your education, the lower your chances of going back to prison becomes. And so we understand how important that is. So I'm going to take you through a few slides of some things that we've done in the different prisons, and just to tell a few stories about some of the things that are going on. Hooray! So this last year at Sing Sing, we did the musical The Wizard of Oz. Every year in Sing Sing, we do a major theatrical production in May. This is very important to the men who are inside. They love it. There's about 60 members of RTA in prison. They're a community of artists who come together. So at Sing Sing right now, we have 3 different programs going on this fall. I'll talk about this in a second, but we have 3 programs. One is a acting improv class. One is a painting and drawing class, and one is a Shakespeare text, get on your feet with Shakespeare class, because their next production next year is going to be a production of Twelfth Night in May. So we really want to support them in getting in their bodies the Shakespearean language and all this. So last year at Sing Sing, for the first time in the history of RTA, we got permission for the men to perform for their families. Never have they been able to do that before, because it had always been a security issue. But we got permission somehow from Albany docs to do this. And so the men decided themselves, because they have a huge part in choosing the material they want to do. They have a huge part in choosing the plays they want to do. They chose to do The Wizard of Oz because they wanted to do a family musical, because they knew their children would be coming. Okay, so I'm telling you something, to be in a rehearsal process where you're seeing 25 maximum security men's prisoners, kick out, Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, and the Munchkin Land scene, and with such commitment to the process, and then have them perform for their families last May. It was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever seen. Their children got to come, they got to see these men engaged positively in their lives, they get to share this experience with them. So the woman in the middle is an actress named April Perry. We bring in actresses sometimes, because sometimes the men aren't so interested in playing women's parts. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. And so we bring in actresses who will play parts in various times. So it was a great success. Hopefully this is going to kind of set a pattern where we're going to get to have the incarcerated men and women perform for their families more consistently in other facilities. This is a wonderful man named Skip, and this is some of his art. He's an artist who's a part of the painting and drawing program at Sing Sing. He actually just has been transferred to Fishkill, which is a medium security prison, and luckily we're an RTA there as well, so he's going to join the program there and the community there. Skip actually is also an actor. He played the lead in their last show at Sing Sing called Golden Boy, the Clifford Odets play about the boxer in Golden Boy, which is a great play, directed by a wonderful man named Richard Hamburger. So we bring in artists, we bring in directors, they facilitate these experiences. This guy is one of the great artists at Sing Sing who is continually, this whole community of painting and drawing people who are doing their work too. This is a production a couple years ago called Amazing Grace. It was an original musical that the women created. I have a little short clip that I'm going to show at the end of this of that experience, so I'm not going to talk too much about it now. These women right now at Bedford Hills are in the rehearsal process to do the musical The Wiz in January, so they're deep in rehearsal with all the ups and downs and trials and tribulations. Everything we do at RTA is about the process. Of course, the participants care about the show and that the show is going to be good, right? But what we're really interested in is, how, we're inviting these men and women into an environment where many of them, for the only time in their incarceration, they feel safe. They feel like they have people who support them. They feel respected as human beings. That's deeply important to their experience there. They come into this container, and the container is about confidentiality, it's about respect, it's an opportunity to practice cultivating ways of being in the world that are different for them, as they define it. So for example, that could be, how am I as a team player? How do I communicate more effectively in the world? How do I manage my own triggers when I'm angry? How do I resolve conflict differently? All of these things are available in terms of what we invite the men and women to be in process around, to be thinking about as they go through whatever arts experience they're in. And we think that this is really important in terms of their going back into the world. We think about acting or theater just as one art form. What are the skills that people build? Being able to stand up and deliver a monologue, being able to communicate effectively, being able to think under pressure, being able to work as a team towards a goal, right? These are kind of the soft skills that we really hone in on and really ask our participants to reflect upon, so that, because that translates to their work life when they go home, employment. That translates to how they are in their family, how they are in their community, okay? So we're constantly about the process with RTA. And we ask them to reflect throughout the process. What am I learning about myself? What's hard for me here? What goals do I have in terms of cultivating myself as a person, or life skills that I will find important? So we're trying to support them in their process as we go through these experiences. This is the only modern dance program in America. It's at Woodburn. It's facilitated by an extraordinary woman named Susan Slotnick, a choreographer, teacher. And let me tell you something, there's a lot on the line for these men who show up for this modern dance program. I mean, in terms of norms around gender norms, about what's acceptable in terms of masculinity and femininity. They have to, it's scary to get up, and the style of dance is kind of like an Alvin Ailey style dance. We just did the show this summer in Woodburn. There's 20 men who are in 5 different dance pieces that they've been 4 times a week rehearsing on for 6 months. They're ready, and they're incredible, really, truly incredible. And all of a sudden, 300, men from the prison come in to watch the show, and a lot's on the line. They're shaking, they're afraid. They're afraid they're going to be ridiculed, right? But soon, and the woman, Susan Slotnick, who teaches this, is amazing. She came out and she said something like, throughout history, men have always danced in public spaces. It's only recently in the history of the world that this has not happened. So this is about reclaiming that history of men dancing, right? So she kind of sets that context. And these men give it their all, and at the end of it, this population of men just get it. They get the dedication. They get the risk these men took, and they are so filled with appreciation. We always have a talk back. It's quite something. And they put up with a lot of crap from people inside. You know, the space where they rehearse is, the windows are there. People see them going back and forth. It's, you know, it requires a commitment from them that is deep, and so, but also the rewards are deep. So it's a great program. And this is from Greenhaven. They did a musical Broadway review for many of the men inside Greenhaven. You know, Broadway music isn't their typical kind of like genre that they've grown up with and are super comfortable with, you know. But they really wanted to do this, and they, you know, again, get up there and they sing and they perform, and there's a whole range of talent. Some of the most extraordinarily talented and educated and brilliant minds I've ever met are in prison. And, you know, and the whole spectrum is there, and we welcome them all, right? So again, the risk of being able to do that is deep. And then this was, I just wanted to say, Fishkill. This was a production of Death of a Salesman they did last year, a really amazing experience. So this is just kind of a taste of the different kinds of programs we do. I want to just kind of now jump into showing a little quick video. This is from, again, the women's prison in Bedford Hills. This was about a year-long process they went through to write an original musical based on their stories and put this together with original music and then perform it. And let me just say, the women's prison, I could talk all day about the differences between the women's prison and men's prisons, about the cultures. It's deeply fascinating. And the women in the 6 years that RTA had been at Bedford Hills had never performed before this moment for the population of women because they were too afraid. They were too afraid that they would be ripped down, frankly. You know, and it's different in the men's prisons for some reason. They still, you know what I mean? For some reason, that was more on the line for this experience in the women's prison. They were worried, you know, but then all of a sudden 250, you know, incarcerated women file in to watch this show, and then they delivered the show, and it was an extraordinary experience. So this is a little taste of what we do and what that was. So if you could just go ahead and do that.
We are all in this for each other, and it has been a beautiful year of rehearsals and creation. And I was so proud of you guys this morning in the performance. It was just wonderful.
Yay.
So let's do another one, okay? And let's do it for
standing ovation.
RTA.
RTA stands for Rehabilitation Through the Arts, and they use different types of creative art to help us with different skills for communication, for listening, you know, taking constructive criticism, things like that, that helps you in your family life, in your, you know, society, you know, in general, in your personal relationships with people.
All right, everybody. Here we go.
We started out with a writing exercise. Tell us a story about something that happened in your life. I'll never forget that story. She once told me when she lived kind of made an impact on you. And people came up with all kinds of stories. He was always there, the homeless man. Then they came up with the idea that let's put all of these stories to music. Let's make songs out of them. And it all gave birth to Amazing Grace. It was a wonderful experience, a great journey.
I don't know who got this brainstorm idea to open the play a cappella with me. Because I'd be the first thing the audience saw. I have self-esteem issues. I'm real bubbly, A-type personality, but deep down inside, I really have a lot of self-esteem issues. And part of my personality is my protection.
This must be a misunderstanding. Did I really hear you right? Oh, I need to know if you're telling me the truth.
So what do? I look in the second row. I look dead in this lady's face, and she says like this, oh. So I got all this confidence. And I was like, I can do this. It's only 3 lines. And I did it.
5, 6, 7, 8.
I was 6 years old and my sister Grace was 8.
Most of the people came in saying, I don't sing, I can't sing. They sounded amazing together.
This must be a misunderstanding. Did I really hear you right?
Well, I still don't want to do it, even though I already did it.
This is how parents feel when... Woo! Hey, take 2. This is how children feel when their parents chastise them.
The only reason I did it was because I was trying to show everybody that we sometimes have to do things that we don't like because that's part of a greater good, which is the play that we're doing. And life is like that, too.
Must be a misunderstanding. No! I can't stay here.
When you do the writings, for example, it lets you see people can relate or share. They don't have to have experiences that are similar. The writings aren't like exactly, bullseye what happened to me either. They're just an avenue. They're a vehicle to vent. I remember looking at Faith and seeing my estranged daughter. You work through it, not even realizing you've got this issue in the recesses of your mind, and you think you've buried it deep, but it makes you who you are today.
I remember how wonderful this group of women sang, acted, and danced. We feel abandoned at times. We feel lost at times. We feel, ironically, even joyful at times.
I remember how sexy Jazzy was in her dress.
I remember the day we received our costumes. We felt so alive. Skinny jeans, scarves, oh boy.
It's all a part of the journey. But that journey makes us who we become. I didn't start out as the person that I am today. When I came to prison, I was a completely different person. I've grown a lot here. And RTA is responsible for some of that growth.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light.
Yeah, so that's just kind of a taste of kind of that process and some of the experiences some of the women have had through that, and kind of, just what we do. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to need the remote. All right, so I'm going to be talking about another art project that was started at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution 3 summers ago. And Riverbend Maximum Security Institution is housed, it's in Nashville, Tennessee, at the end of a long road in kind of the middle of nowhere. It's a large prison. It houses maximum and medium security prisoners and virtually all of the death row men who are living in Tennessee. It's a very innocuous-looking space, one of the new prisons, very much unlike Sing Sing, that looks more like the DMV or something, aside from the razor wire. And they do advertise that rehabilitative programs are a major part of their mission, and our class fit into Riverbend as one of those rehabilitative. Even though we're working with men on death row who, for the most part, will never be leaving Riverbend alive, these programs are still available to them. And actually, the thing that Craig was saying about model prisoners or, lower incident rates, this is definitely the case at Unit 2, which is the death row unit. They have a reward system, so the men earn points and they earn credit for being in these classes by, behaving. Basically, they make jokes about that too, but like what behavior modification. But it allows them to get outside of their cells because for the most part, the men at Riverbend spend 23 hours a day in lockdown. They get 1 hour in the yard, which is basically a cage. They eat in their cells, they sleep in their cells, they shower for the most part in their cells, unless they're part of one of these classes. So I'm showing this slide because one of the first things I did when I went into the prison as an instructor, I was going in as an art teacher, which is what I do at St. Thomas Aquinas. I teach drawing and painting mostly. We did contour line drawing and basically paired up man with man or volunteer with a man. And we did these almost blind contour drawings of each other's faces. And it was a very difficult thing for them to do. It's always difficult for students to do. But in this context, having the men look at each other face to face, that carefully, it always makes people laugh, this discomfort of doing it. These are not actually the first contour line drawings that we did that night, but these came later, and I was just kind of showing you an example of that. I came in as the person who, who was teaching skills for the most part. That was sort of my role in the group. There were 4 of us to begin with, 4 artist educators, 3 of them from Watkins College of Art and Design in Nashville, and then me, who used to teach at Watkins, but as I mentioned earlier, I've been gone for 10 years. So because they have no access to the internet, they have limited books, although they have built a small library there, I would bring in these instruction sheets that had examples and things that they could look at, after we left, and more information about artists so that they could see all the different ways that people make art, that even though I was teaching them a particular kind of skill or process for whatever it was we were doing, that there were lots of other artists that were doing it different ways. So what happened that first summer, and this was the summer of 2013, when Tom Williams and Robin Paris had the opportunity to do this class. Lisa Gunther from Vanderbilt University had been teaching a philosophy reading group for some time, and she was going away for the summer and asked us if we would be interested in taking over her class, basically, for the summer. So originally, we thought that it was just going to be an 8-week project. And so we sat down with a group of student volunteers from Watkins and the men, and we went back and forth and decided, well, what are we going to do with this 8 weeks? And what was decided that we would do these 2 different projects. One was something we called the Surrogate Project, which was a project where an art piece where the men would tell us things that they would have done or wanted to do if they could be outside. And the other was collaborative drawing. And so I'm just going to show you a couple examples of the surrogates. One was David Duncan. Actually, a number of the men in our group are very interested in education and issues of education, particularly in disadvantaged communities. And so David wanted someone to research the cost of incarcerating someone as opposed to educating someone. So 2 of the students in the group took that project on, and they did this printed piece that was distributed then in some of the exhibitions. These are 2 more. There were quite a number of these, so I'm just going to give you an example. One, Harold had mentioned that he had not seen the night sky in 25 years, and he asked us to go out and take pictures of the night sky. And I was actually in Colorado that summer, and I tried to take pictures of the night sky, and they didn't come out that well. But then Robin went and took some really beautiful pictures of the night sky, and Wayne wrote on there that he had not seen the stars in the night sky for over 25 years. And it brings attention to just how much light there always is in a prison, because there are all these, I mean, even at night, they keep the lights on inside and big lights outside. Gary Cohen, who actually, this piece was built as his memorial, he self-identifies as a reader of books and was the Unit 2 librarian And he asked if we could go to different libraries and take pictures. And Robin Paris took this project on, and it's actually now evolved into quite an extensive number of different libraries that she's gone to all over the world and taken pictures of, and then bring them back, and Gary writes on them, writes some narrative about how hard it is to not ever be able to see these books or some imaginary story. One of the things that's really hard for them about being in prison, and many of them have been on death row for 25 to 30 years, 32 years, waiting execution, is that the food in prison is really bad. So they talk about food a lot, and they think about food and ways that they can enhance the flavor of their food. And so one of the men asked us if we would go and enjoy his favorite breakfast, and he said it didn't matter whether we cooked it ourselves or went to the International House of Pancakes, but he gave us this whole list of different things that he wanted to have for breakfast, and we cooked those things, and then as a group sat down and had dinner. And in each of these surrogates experiences, we would document them with photographs so that we had those to exhibit, which is what ends up happening with this work. The other project that we did with the men was something called collaborative drawing or add-on drawing. And the way this worked was someone would start a drawing, and then we would bring it in and out, and others would add on to it. And this is one that Harold Wayne Nichols presented to me one day. This was maybe spring of last year when I was there on spring break. And it was just this very beautiful, simple drawing of a light bulb, and asked me if I would collaborate with him on this drawing. So I took the drawing and added these radiating lines and what I thought were kind of fanciful drawings of buildings dancing and whatnot. He responded with this little dragon and a page, which I knew immediately I was supposed to draw in, because we never talked about what any of this meant. Some of the collaborators did discuss their drawings, and in fact, I worked on several other of these, and sometimes they would write notes, here's what I'm doing, what are you doing? But Wayne and I never did. So the only thing I could tell was that the dragon looked kind of angry to me, so I put a nuclear power plant in the page because I was trying to figure out why was the dragon mad. And then when I got the drawing back from Wayne, he had added these airplanes and people marching in this kind of war, post-apocalyptic, I wasn't even sure what it was, but he went on to write a really long description about what this drawing meant for him, and it really had some ideas that he had that related to the harnessing of electricity as being this sort of really dangerous things that humans had done and the road it led us down. Some of the others, this is just, I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. Go back. We were doing this the first summer where we had lots of work that we were bringing in and out and distributing. And one night, Abu Ali we were leaving, and he said, well, what about me? I didn't get anything. And I had this really weird-looking piece of paper with this little mark on it. Christy Hargrove was in the habit of marking paper on the back so that it made a kind of embossing on the front. And I said, well, I really only have this, would you be interested in it? And he said, sure. So then he made it sort of look like an ice cream cone sort of, and added that little flower. Christy knew that Abu Ali was very interested in animals, and in fact, this is his piece back here on the table if you get a chance to look at it. So she added the deer, and then he added the birds and a quote by Mother Teresa. And they continued to work on this drawing back and forth until it ended up looking like this final piece on the bottom. So I only brought a few. If you're interested in looking at more of them, there are quite a few on a website that I put together for, really I started it just to, mostly to give reading information for the students who were involved in this project, but also then what ended up happening was the men's friends and family started looking at this website And it gave them an opportunity to kind of see what the guys were doing. So we were then extending whatever it was we were doing that we thought was sort of somewhat private to this bigger arena. Then the other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit was these exhibitions. So when we first started the project, it never occurred to us that we were really going to go out and have these series of exhibitions of the work. It was really more about, oh, we had this 8 weeks, what are we going to do with them? We'll do these things, and it's going to help the men, and it'll help the students, and then that would be that. What ended up happening, because Nashville, Tennessee, and of course it's really easy for people in New York to think, oh, Nashville, it's in Tennessee, it's the South, this is just like really, backwoods or whatever. And granted, it can be that too, but there's a really strong arts community in Nashville, and part of the reason is because of Watkins College of Art and Design. And they have several connections with galleries. They have their own gallery that they exhibit student work and bring in work. And then Christy Hargrove, who was part of our original group, is a member of an artist collective known as Coop. And so they made the decision to have the first exhibition in Nashville. And you can see it was extremely well attended. All right, so this picture is taken, this top one, it's an arcade, and we're taking a picture across the arcade, and you can kind of see the gallery is packed with people. And it got quite a lot of press too. And as you can see too, like not an enormous amount of money was spent, framing the work or anything. It just kind of got stuck up on the walls, but people had an opportunity to see it, and the comments and the impact were much greater than we had expected. Then the men had this idea, kind of empowered by this exhibit. They had the idea to do a gift show. They had been reading Lewis Hyde's book, The Gift, which is based on Marcel Mauss's ideas of reciprocity and a gift economy as opposed to a capitalist economy. So they decided that they were going to make objects that could be given away in an exhibition. And so Noskos Gallery in Nashville accepted this show, and the men made objects, and it was set up a little bit like a store, and people came, the participants came to the exhibition, and they chose an object that they wanted to take with them, and then the only thing they had to do was to agree to have their picture taken with their object. And I'll show you those pictures in a minute. All right, one of the more powerful results of this was one of the students, the Watkins students who was in our initial group, had the idea through a collaboration that she was working on that first summer to exhibit the personal photographs of people in prison. What was happening was a lot of the men that we were working with were asking us to scan their personal photos or somehow preserve their personal photos because they were so valuable to them, and they were afraid that something was going to happen to their pictures of their friends and family. So she had the idea to do an exhibit of personal photos of people in prison, and she did some of the men in our group in Unit 2, and also wrote letters to some women in the women's prison. And it ended up being this exhibition of personal photos. And some of them had notes on them, like the ones that you're seeing here, and some of them were just grouped together as individual photos. And this exhibit, probably more so than any of the others, really created some pushback, particularly from victims and victims' families, because even as we were trying in all of our efforts to humanize the men and provide an opportunity for people to see them as real people, this one really, really did that. Like pictures of men with their families, and then comments, like, oh, did you ever expect, like I never expected when I was this age that I would end up in prison. Just recently, and in fact I just took that show down about a week and a half ago, I curated a show in our art gallery at St. Thomas Aquinas College of the kind of a retrospective and extension of the work that we had been done. It was called Unit 2 Voices, Artworks from Death Row. And actually, this piece that was on the cover of our brochure, we had a small catalog, a couple of them are on the front there, was one of those collaborative or add-on pieces. So basically in this show, I exhibited some of the surrogates, some of the collaborative drawings, a wall of the photographs from the gift show, and then for the first time, some of the individual works of the men who I had been working with for the past 2.5 years. And then this is a long wall, a view of the gallery, and then that end wall are the series of individual photographs from the gift show. All right, so I just wanted to kind of talk just a little bit, and I'm going through this kind of quickly because I want to make sure we have time to have conversation at the end. But this was the first time that we had exhibited individual works of the guys. And so on the top, you see 2 pieces by Abu Ali and Derek. And both of these men had been working with art before we came in. So both of them already had skills. They were able to develop them a little bit more during the classes that we brought into the prison, but they already had the skills. Some of the other men, like Akil and Donald and Jadangele, had never picked up a paintbrush in their lives, and they had never even thought about exhibiting or expressing themselves or having a voice visually before. And so through this series of painting exercises and drawing exercises, they gained more and more confidence in their ability to do that. And I just want to tell a couple of stories. So Akil Jahai, whose flower this is at the top, I had been kind of trying to encourage him to do something for the show. And he had taken a canvas and he said he would do it, but he couldn't think of anything. And his wife passed away last summer while we were in the middle of going through this project. And he wrote a poem for her and made the decision that he was going to make this flower painting, and he titled it Joanne. And it was posted on the website, and when his family members saw it, apparently they had this, I don't know, like forgiveness for him. I guess there had been a lot of family contention around some of their familial relationships. And then Donald Middlebrooks, whose landscape drawing is there at the bottom, the bridge, he has some pieces in this show, and actually Akil's piece is that shoe, his feet never touch the earth. Donald had never really done any painting before either, and through some really hard work, got to the point where he was able to do a painting of this technical accomplishment. And Jadangele Berry, too, he had never really painted, but decided he wanted to learn how to paint clouds. So he did 2 paintings that were pretty much of the same subject matter, and it was out of a book that I had brought for him to practice with. And on one of them, he put a man running down the road, like he's escaping into the sunset. Gary Cohen, I mentioned before, he is the man responsible for this memorial. It was the librarian for Unit 2, and he would come to class. He was such a nice and funny man. And he would come to class, but he never wanted to do anything. Like, he never wanted to draw, he never wanted to paint. And finally one night I got him to do something. I think he just did it to be nice. And he basically reproduced this painting of a painting that I had brought in to say, well, look, I think you can do this. And he did it, and it amazed him, and he was very proud of it, and he wanted me to post it on the website, which I did. And it started him on a whole series of paintings. And I have to tell you, I wish I could bring them all. There's stacks of them at this point. He's been doing these acrylic paintings on cereal boxes and kosher meal boxes. He paints on both sides of them, and most of the paintings are from some art historical reference, like they're paintings that he's found in art history books, so he's reproducing other artists' works. He's making little books like this one that are just, like accordion books filled with paintings. And it was almost as though once he started, he kept going and kept going. And as it turns out now, Gary had a serious virus in his spinal cord, and he was transferred from Riverbend, from Unit 2, into the special needs unit. So I wasn't able to see him all last summer. He's now paralyzed from the waist down and isn't going to be coming back. And these kinds of things happen really from neglect. He ended up having these extenuating circumstances as a result of no one giving him proper health care when he needed it. The other thing that we did at St. Thomas Aquinas was we had a discussion, an open discussion forum on art and advocacy, and so we used the exhibition as an opportunity to talk about some of these issues, and a number of faculty members were involved and students were involved, and it gave us a forum for that kind of discussion. And, then the Apex show is the first exhibit that has kind of grown out of this project that's been outside of Tennessee, including the one that I did. And so, as I mentioned before, we never expected when we started that all of these things were going to happen. And even when we think about the educational potential, or what education means, what it means to educate. We were working with a group of guys who from the very beginning were interested in this idea of reciprocal education. They didn't like the idea of us going in and just giving them something to them. They wanted to be able to give something back. So in a way for us, the exhibits became this place where they could not just give back to us, which they've done in like a millionfold, but they've also been able to give back to the community, because as people see the show and start to come to understand some of these issues, they think differently about incarceration, and especially the death penalty. For us, it's a little bit different than some of the other rehabilitative programs or education programs in prison, because as I mentioned before, there really isn't a way that you can argue these men are coming back and they're going to re-enter society. As Craig and I were talking, the advantage here is that we're not costing the state anything. We do this completely as volunteers, and so they don't have these kinds of programs that are funded by the state in Tennessee. All of the rehabilitative programs are organized and taught by volunteers, and the majority of them are actually faith-based groups that are coming in and doing Bible studies and things like that. So I think with that I'm going to end. If any of you are interested in seeing more about our project, there's a website there that you can go to, and it's kind of set up so that the lessons that I've taken into the prison, you can click on that category and see more of that, and more of the artwork that they've done just in day-to-day classes within the prison. So I think with that, I know that there are some people here who have been working, as I mentioned, in prisons or maybe interested in this. So I'd like to open it up for questions and discussion. Yes.
If working in death row for educational purposes is not rehabilitative, and it's also not state-sponsored, how did they even get permission? How did you and some of the other professors have permission to go in at all?
Well, at Riverbend, they actually pride themselves in their rehabilitative programs, and they have a volunteer coordinator at the prison who is also the chaplain. And so the chaplain who brought us in was very interested in expanding the education programs at Riverbend. And like I said, we kind of tagged on to Lisa Gunther's philosophy reading group program. She already had this program going on for a while and then went away for the summer. So we took her spot, so to speak. But then after the summer was over, the men wanted to continue with the art, so they asked the volunteer coordinator if we could have a night. So we were going in on Wednesday, now we go in on Thursday. So Thursday night is the night for our class. So they allow the classes really as a way of rewarding the men for good behavior. Did you have something?
Did you say that Tennessee does not give state or federal money to the prisons
For education, yeah, for educational program. At least at Riverbend, the programs that we're involved with are all volunteer run.
Is that common throughout many prisons around the country?
I don't know, I guess some of our other panelists might know. Baz, do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah. I think it probably does vary state to state.
I work through Rutgers, New York.
Oh, Rutgers. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's really called Robeson
Yeah.
Gallery. I'm a teaching artist, and I teach at the Essex County Juvenile Detention Center.
Okay, so I'm just going to say Essex County Juvenile Detention so everybody can hear you.
Oh, sorry. And I know that it's very similar. We're the only secular group that goes in there. It's all faith-based groups. And we provide the classes free of charge, so the state doesn't pay for that at all.
Yeah.
We get funding through Rutgers to do
I have to say, I think it's very politically unpopular for any person in, a powerful position in most states to advocate for things like this. Just the attitude is, well, why should they get it if, we can't?
It's just interesting that they have it in their mission statement to say it's
The rehabilitative, yeah, yeah.
they have no programs.
Yeah.
Well, that's the paradox. That's the absolute insanity.
Yeah, welcome
of
to our
quote-unquote
lives.
corrections, period, I mean, I have to say that I don't even like the term rehabilitation. Because that implies that someone was habilitated in the first place, which is not the case for most of the people incarcerated in this country who were not given that opportunity. So, I mean, it's unfortunate because a lot of times, I'm very glad that our facility is welcomes us as a program, and these facilities open the doors to us to do this positive work. But we always recognize that they're doing it as part of, a manipulative strategy, whether it's to reward good behavior and keep people in check, whether it's to be able to say, oh, we look good, look, we have education. So I'm always aware of that, the larger insidious pieces of it. But it's, leaves us in the position of, well, we're still going to do good work, even if it's in that context of something more, manipulative, perhaps.
Yes, sir.
Do you work with individuals that will be released or just people that are on death row?
Well, I only work with men on death row because that's the class that I'm in, but the other panelists work with general population.
And you mentioned education. Are guys being prepped for when they're released, or are they earning degrees, certificates?
Right, so that was I don't know if you were here for when I spoke, but okay, so they are being, they get college credits, and they're and the idea is that they're coming home and they complete their degrees on the outside. I call it the best of both worlds approach. It's kind of like you get, there's a benefit to getting a degree inside, obviously, a massive benefit. But the thing you don't get when you get a college degree in prison is all the other stuff that comes with college. That's really important. The networking, the community, the things that go beyond simply, and I don't mean simply to minimize, it's a massive piece of paper that you get that's usually significant. But the whole idea of it is to give you all of the other stuff. So you accrue credits on the inside, and then you complete the degree upon coming home.
I do apologize because I was way full of asking questions that you answered.
No worries.
With individuals being released, statistics show that guys that are receiving some form of education are less likely to return, and they spend more money on incarceration than they do on actually educating people. That's just a proven fact. So
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, actually, because I forgot to mention a really important piece of the puzzle, which is I was talking about the elimination of financial aid for incarcerated students. Well, Obama has announced an experimental initiative to bring back Pell, and which is a pretty big deal, exciting thing. I mean, I'm not thrilled that it's experimental. I'm not thrilled that it's on a limited basis. I'm not thrilled that we have to be proving things that have already been proven 500 times over, namely the connection between recidivism rates and education and so on. But so my program has applied, many other programs have applied to be part of that initiative, which would allow these programs, it would allow us to multiply in size and would allow these programs to return. So fingers crossed for not just us, but to see the programs return overall. The other thing, though, is that I don't like the recidivism argument. To me, I recognize that it's a reality and it's also a very sellable reality. But recidivism, having our students not return to prison is setting the bar very low. To me, education in prisons is about, right to education. It's about equity. It's about educational opportunity that was not provided to people in the first place. It's about civil rights. It's about things that are much bigger than just, okay, how can we make sure people don't come back to prison? How do we make sure that people get the opportunities that were never provided to them in the first place? So the recidivism argument, I think, for those of us doing this work is always the thing that we kind of grit our teeth and have to spit out, but it's a frustrating one because it's so the tip of the iceberg.
So I understand what you're saying, but even with that will allow an individual to become a productive individual in society.
Definitely.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you work with, I know you work with individuals in Tennessee, any of you guys work with individuals in New York?
New York State.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both of them are in New York, and I'm the only Tennessee person.
I just want to say, in my experience, there's a reason that, there's a lot of reasons why prisons are called invisible cities, not the least of which is that it seems to me that each prison really is very, very different from all the others. They are unique. I mean, they're places that are particular to that place and particular to the people who live there, who work there. So it's very difficult to kind of generalize about how prisons work because even in the 5 prisons I'm in every day, the administrations are completely different. Their desire to support the various incarcerated men and women vary incredibly, and a lot of times it has to do with individuals. There's an individual, for example, who really gets what we do, and they're the gatekeeper for us, and that really helps. At other prisons, that gatekeeper isn't helpful. In fact, they're a barrier, right? So it really, really varies a lot in terms of what we can do. And so it also varies in terms of the support that's inside for supporting people in, what they would call meaningful and successful reentry. Some facilities do it better than other ones. Some have programming inside that is directly related to supporting them in reentry, and some don't. And it really just varies.
Which is a frightening thing, because it speaks to the arbitrariness of our criminal justice system. It is so system to system, facility to facility, and there's so much power in the hands of, random and arbitrary people. It's a terrifying reality.
It really is.
And political, too.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I'm interested in access to the programs within the prisons where they operate. Barbara, you were talking about that the men you work with have access because they were on good
Right.
behavior.
They have an honor system.
Are there other ways that prisoners are limited to the access of your program where they are operated? How do you get into the programs once you're there?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, because for us, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, for us, it's we have a broad call out for an application process. So we do widespread testing among people who are eligible in all of the facilities that we recruit in. And the eligibility requirements are fairly basic in terms of coming home within 5 years, GED or high school diploma, and no, really severe disciplinary actions within the last 6 months. And so it really applies to a lot of people. We try to do as broad a reach as we can, and then through that there's kind of a traditional admissions process. They take the exam. If they pass, they move to the next step, which is an essay. Then we do interviews, and then we do admissions. So and we try to make it as much an academic process and as little a Department of Corrections process as possible.
Yeah, with RTA, so in all 5 prisons, there's a community of these men and women who are a part of our programming. And in each facility, we have what's called a steering committee. It's a group of 5 men or 5 women who are service leaders, who are incarcerated men or women, who kind of get trained to step up into this kind of service position within RTA. So they're the steering committee. And really, in many ways, they're part of the process by which we vet people to come into the program, because really they know people inside way more than we do. So I basically manage the program with these incarcerated men or women. They deal with issues inside and I deal with issues outside, and together we run the program. So if somebody wanted to get into our program, they would make that known to our steering committee, and then of course there would have to be some kind of process that the facility lets us know if they're able to because of their disciplinary record. In Bedford Hills, the women's prison, for instance, there's Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 tickets that you get for behavior. And if you have a Tier 3 ticket, you're just not allowed to do that kind of programming there. But again, that's different someplace else. So basically, if they want to get in, Sing Sing has a year-long waiting list to get into RTA because it's a capacity issue. Once they're finally in RTA, they have to go through an 8-week orientation class we call RTA 101. And it's kind of like inviting them into, like, what is this culture you're stepping into? What are the rules here that we expect from you? And also, for them to get to know us, to say, hey, maybe this isn't for you, but let's, figure that out. What are the norms that we agree to so that we can do our programming successfully? So once they're in the door, they have to be interviewed by a member of the steering committee. And those guys or those women who are incarcerated men or women have a lot to say about who gets in the program, which is, I think, useful because they kind of get more than we do to be able to make decisions about people in a way that we really can't. And then it's really kind of up to how they choose to participate as they go along. Right?
I have a question maybe more for Baz and Craig. Thinking of people who maybe experienced your programs within prison and then perhaps have left afterwards, I'm wondering if there's been any interest in people who have left prison to stay involved or to help, or if that's, your program's a little bit newer, but I'm wondering if there's been some sort of desire to be engaged and give back to the program if they...
Oh yeah, there's a ton of that. So we already, we're partnered with College Initiative, which is again about providing access to higher education for those impacted by the criminal justice system. And that is almost entirely staffed by formerly incarcerated people, some of whom have had some connection with our program. We do our best to bring as many people back inside as possible and get them the access to talk to our students and mentor our students and meet with our students. We have the student who I mentioned who's graduating is working at College and is soon to start working at College Initiative as a mentor to our students. And then there's also just, there's an incredible, true in terms of what you were just saying now, there's an unbelievable level of informal mentorship that is a lifeline to our students and to, in general, individuals coming home and having to face the horrors of reentry, who could not do it without other people who've been there and gotten through it. So it's a constant, and it's and likewise mentorship happening on the inside. My program has become 1,000,000 times easier to run with every passing year because there are more students on the inside who then take the younger, well, not younger, but newer students under their wings and teach them about, don't worry about your essay. The level of mentorship is unreal, and it's so vastly valuable that we couldn't do it without it.
One program we have going now on the outside, we're in the process of creating an original play about the experience of reentry, with about 15 men who were formerly incarcerated, who were a part of RTA inside, who've come out, and they get together and they meet every Sunday at Carnegie Hall to basically, through their stories about their experience with coming back into the world, are developing this original theater piece that they're going to perform in, and that's going to be used as an education tool and a way to kind of communicate with the public about this reality. That's one thing we do. when men and women come back into the world, so many factors all of a sudden become in play, right? Like, who, you know, first of all, where they get paroled to, right? They have to go to a family member, or they have to set up some kind of situation. So they may be scattered all over the place. So that can be challenging in terms of getting people together to do meaningful support. You know, all of a sudden it's about a job, and it's about figuring out employment. And certainly when you first come out, you have to do all of these different kinds of programs that you're required to do, like that are, you can't get out of, and they're, you know, during the day. And so you have to go to them, and it doesn't matter if you have a job. You have to go to these mandated programs when you get on the outside. It's very difficult. Like, so many variables are stacked against people in terms of when they come out, you know. So actually the truth is we find it difficult to reach, you know, everybody, you know, it's interesting. A lot of the men and women say, oh, I'm definitely going to be a part of RTA when I get out. I'm going to connect with you immediately. But then we kind of lose sight of them because they necessarily become so immersed in the deep challenges that requires for them just to figure out their lives. You know, we have a yearly gathering we call Homecoming every January, where all the people who got out in the last year bring their families, and many, many people who have gone home come to that, and so that's a really great event. But, you know, it's, some people stick and some don't, and we just try to make ourselves available to those who can, so, yeah.
Do you have some?
I wanted to ask about when you're proposing or organizing an education program for prison. Maybe you talked about this earlier, sorry, I was late too. How does the role of art play into the importance, like emphasizing the importance of education?
Well, I can just tell you that from our standpoint, it was something that the men wanted, right? So they asked for it, and that's how those programs get started there, is that it starts with the interest of the men in the prison, and they ask the volunteer coordinator if they can have this class, or at least that's how it was for us.
You know, and this was kind of said before, but, you know, we make it as easy as possible for the Department of Corrections to take our programming. We don't ask them for really anything. I think they give us a little bit of support around maybe like copying and printing or something like that, but other than that, we're funded entirely outside of the Department of Corrections. So we know that for them to kind of be open to the possibility of our programming going there, you know, we have to just be like, here, you know, silver platter, like, don't worry about it, we'll take care of the details, you know, and then we go in and they see over time that the program benefits the membership, and also that, you know, like someone said, it makes them kind of look good, because ostensibly there is a mandate around supporting people meaningfully, whether that really plays out or not. You know, but I honestly, the way I think of it is like we have to be like these stealth ninjas. There's so many walls and barriers to this going in. And from my point of view, I know from my experience and the experience of the men and women we serve that there is gold in what we deliver. And that's because they say it, that their lives are changing in ways they define. They find our programming important and transformative for them. And part of our game is how do we just figure out how to get through all of the gates and the walls that are both physical and energetic and in the mind and personalities. We got to just be zen about it. And we got to figure it out and get it in there, because we got to deliver the gold. You know, that's what it's about. And so we just do our best just to be, thank you, docs, thank you so much. We're going to just... Yes, okay.
You get really good at saying thank you.
You get really good at saying thank you.
And please.
And your relationship to powerlessness, because there is none. They really were there at their behest and at their whim. And sometimes that can be really hard. But ultimately, the larger game, the larger goal, is that we need to get in there to do this work. You know, so.
There's been some talk in the media about solitary confinement in prisons, and working with death row inmates who are in lockdown 24 hours a day. I'm curious to know, do they express grievances about the situation of being alone all the time, having the lights on all the time? Have they expressed the concerns of that? Do you see the effects of it psychologically on people?
Well, absolutely. And they do talk about it. And if you ever have a chance to go there, you can see it for yourself. You know, I mean, and honestly, at Sing Sing, they do tours there, so you can go. It is so ridiculously loud, and it's never quiet, and the lights are always on. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, with the other panel that was involved with this exhibition in Dume, who was in our group and was released he was on death row for 19 years and in prison for 24 for a crime that he did not commit, was speaking about that, and the men speak about it quite a bit. And in fact, Donald, whose picture, that landscape picture with the bridge on it, he had tried to commit suicide just right before we came in. He tried to hang himself with a bed sheet. So there's an enormous amount of depression, and to be honest, I could start crying right now, just some of the things that people have talked about, and the tenderness that you start to feel with anybody that you work with that intimately, and with our men, I'm sure it's the case with anybody that's in prison, that if you do the research and really review why are they there are men in Unit 2 who are there because they've done horrible, horrible things, and they're probably not going to be rehabilitated. But we're not working with any of those men, and some of the men have done some pretty horrible things, but they are able to be rehabilitated, and we see it. But the effects of living solitarily, it's the reason why they work so hard to earn these points to get out, because if they make it to Unit 2A, then they are allowed access to this day room, which is where we have all our classes, and they have their classes there, and they get to go there on Saturday and work. So it's a huge reward for them.
One of the things that we say, one of the sayings we have is, what would it be like if your entire life was defined by the worst mistake you ever made? Everybody in this room has made some horrible mistake, perhaps, as you define it. And what if that was just, what set your life up for the rest of it, right? We also know, and sometimes I hear from people like, why do you do this? Why do you provide this? What's the point? Sometimes from corrections officers, sometimes from other people. And one of the things we say is, 95% of people who are incarcerated do eventually go home. And how do we want those people going home, right? It's, I think, not unfair to say that Sing Sing and places like it are one of the biggest tax funder, government-supported school for criminals in the world. You want to learn how to be a great criminal? Great, that's where you go. And we're all supporting that. And, they're going to be learning something when they go to prison, So what do we want to support them in learning, And I appreciate also is that, all of our people are people who want to be in our program. And one of the greatest things about it is, it's everything that's not some surly high school class that doesn't want to be learning. It's people who are just like, I'm ready, let's go. And the dedication and focus in those rooms is like amazing, what Baz was saying about, there's no cell phones, there's no computers, no like checked out students in the back going like, oh my God, why do I have to be here, right? It's, let's go, I want to learn, there's hunger there that's beautiful. And so, yeah, that's it.
Well, I guess it would depend on what capacity you wanted to get involved, what you're qualified to teach and such is something to keep in mind. I don't know what level, but we get a lot of inquiries, but I think, unfortunately, we get inquiries, there's some notion that anyone can come in and teach in a prison, and I'm like, this is an academic college program, so the credentials and such which speaks to misconception. I'll hear it from my undergraduate students out on the outside at John Jay. Can I come in and tutor these guys? And I'm like, well, actually, they can tutor you 5 times over. But but I think there are definitely always, if you are qualified to teach in a college scenario, or anyone is, there are always, it's always worth emailing programs and being in touch with different programs. I know I'm always open to instructors, and having experience in a prison setting is totally not necessary at all. I think it ends up being, and I think that's true for a lot of programs, that it's not about that you get that experience. It's about being a great teacher, period, and being a great educator. So I don't think the experience matters.
And there's so much need. I mean, there are juvenile justice centers, there are jails, like there are community centers. There are so many places where someone coming in from the outside and adding to whatever is happening there, just where you feel like you want to insert yourself.
For people who teach the arts or facilitate arts experiences, one of the things I always say to our facilitators is, come up with a workshop or an experience that you would most love to teach, that you're most excited about. And usually, people who come to us and want to do something, they're like, well, I could do this, and I say, just come up with what really turns you on, and because that's the energy that the, men and women inside want. And and there's lots of other kinds of ways to volunteer or teach in prison. There's lots of different kinds of programs. There's Alternatives to Violence program, AVP, in a lot of prisons, where you facilitate really interesting experiential processes where people basically look at their around issues around violence, around anger, and how stuff like that. And that was formed from a Quaker program, which is really interesting. So there's lots of stuff out there. Yeah.
All right, well, I think we're going to wrap up the formal part of this discussion. I'm going to be around, and I'm assuming our other speakers will be around for a few minutes if you have any specific questions you want to ask. But thank you so much for coming, and go out there and vote.